Tanya, if you perfect. Now, I'm sure, well, I believe everyone's quite familiar with Zoom, but here is a sort of a bit of a refresher slide if you just needed to remember a few things. The main ones, I won't go through all of them, I'll let you read through, but the main ones is that you can mute, we actually would require you to mute yourself unless you're talking today, just to cut out any background noise. So your mic is in the bottom left-hand corner of that black bar. You can also share or stop your video right next to it. It's really nice to see your faces, and for Natanya, that gives her a bit of feedback as she's talking. So we'd love if you could put it on, but if you're having internet problems or you don't want to today, that's fine as well. The chat function is always there if you wanted to ask questions throughout, and we will have a Q&A period at the end of the session too. But in that chat box as well, you have Jessalyn Lim, who's going to be helping with just providing some support. So you can address the question to everyone, or you can address it specifically to Jess if you have any questions about Zoom or features or interacting here. You will also find that you've got reactions in more of the right-hand side of that black bar. If you've got the upgraded version of Zoom, you might have a few more reactions than just the usual thumbs up and the claps, but feel free to use those to interact a little bit as well. And I think everyone's name's coming up all right. Let me just check. Yep, perfect. All right, so I'll hand over to Natanya, and Natanya has done some amazing work with social media, not just for our district, but nationally for Rotaract Australia, and for a few major Rotary initiatives as well. So she also has done a lot of training around social media, and she shared her expertise quite widely. So we're very appreciative to have her speak today about this. And I know it's particularly a topic she's very interested in, because there is a lot of power we have as individuals with social media. So one more reminder to mute your mics if you're not talking, and I will pass on to Natanya.
Awesome, thank you. Lovely to be here this morning. Thank you for joining. I know that Saturday morning is not always, normally sleep-in day, but thank you for getting up. I really appreciate that. For those of you who don't know me, I mean, Bea already sort of introduced me, but I'm Natanya. I have been in Rotaract for about almost 4 years now as part of the Monash Rotaract Club here in Melbourne. And yeah, I started in social media through photography. So I was sort of taking photos and sharing it on Instagram, and I created a blog, and that was sort of how I started getting into digital marketing and PR and image and brand identity and all those kinds of things. And since then, I've set up the Monash Rotaract socials. I worked with Rotaract Australia. I've worked with the district as well, both Rotary and Rotaract. And I am currently running the social media for Rotarians Against Malaria in Australia. So that's a little bit about me. A bit of structure for today's session. I sort of want it to be, it's really thinking about how we can use social media to help others, to help causes, how online social media movements work, the advantages and disadvantages of social media. And yeah, I sort of want it to be a little bit more of an open discussion. It's not so much me having all of the answers. I don't have the answers. Social media is a very big, there's lots of advantages, there's lots of disadvantages, and I think we can address some of those disadvantages, but I'm also aware that there are limitations to that. So this session is not so much social media marketing tactics and strategies, but rather the reasons for getting into social media in the first place. If you do want some tactics, you can always come and chat to me. Always more than happy to share some of what I know, but shameless plug here. We've got a social media webinar coming up in a couple of weeks that I'll be presenting at. It's mostly on Facebook marketing, but I hope Jess will put the link into the chat. That's run with our district, and I hope you can join if you want a bit more sort of, yeah, tips and tricks. All right, so I have a few polls that I would like to start off with this morning. So I'm just going to find where I put the polls. Hang on, here we go. So, here we go. Just give me one sec while I set it up. Okay, so we're going to use something that's called Poll Everywhere. So basically type into your browser or your phone pollev.com/nlim733, which you should be able to see on the screen. Is that correct? So go there and there should be a question. The first one being, actually I've got the wrong question up. I'm not quite sure why, but hang on a minute. Yeah, this is the one I wanted to start off with. Sorry. Bit of difficulties there. So I've sort of put on maybe the top 20 or so social media platforms. There are plenty of others, but these are the big ones. And I know obviously it varies by geographical location throughout the world too. Really fun to see all the bars moving. Couple more minutes. Yeah, so we can see a bit of a spread. I mean, Facebook is the biggest. YouTube is fun. So for those of you who've just joined, we're doing a couple of polls. You're free to go to pollev.com/nlim733 and come and join in. Cool. This is a really interesting spread. You can see some of the platforms like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are, you know, social media, therefore posting. But things like WhatsApp or WeChat or even Discord are much more chat-based. So that's really interesting. Next question is, this is in the wrong order. I don't know why, but anyways, what do you like about social media? So this is a ranking activity. Basically, you can put all of these different things in order, the topmost being what you most like, and then you can reorder and submit it, which will be really interesting, I think, to collate everyone's responses. Wait a couple more minutes and see if we get any more responses. Well, I've sort of just kind of come up with sort of the biggest things that some of the biggest advantages of social media. There's plenty of others, but the list could be endless. Cool. So it looks like connecting and reconnecting community is the biggest things. That's really interesting because I think right now we really feel this, that, you know, there's a lot that we can't do. You know, we're pretty restricted in our movements. It's really difficult to connect with other people right now, and possibly the only way to do so is online with social media. So I imagine that these probably change over time. All right, next question is, what do you dislike about social media? So same thing, ranking. Let's put what you dislike the most at the top, if that helps. And again, there's lots to dislike about social media too. I think most people, I mean, I definitely feel this, it's sort of a love-hate relationships with social media. We've got a few people joining in a little bit late, but we're just doing some quick polls to see what you dislike about social media. You can head to the website polev.com/nlin733 up the top, and you can join in. We've got one more question after this, so I won't. This is really interesting. One more minute. How do we like the polls? Can we get a thumbs up in the chat, in the reacts? Cool. Looks like ego comes out first, which is a really interesting. I'm not sure I expected that one to be first, actually. Does someone who put ego first, who ranked ego first, want to give an explanation why they went with that? It's all good if you don't want to. Let's do the next and final question. But go back again. And the question is, what does doing good mean to you? This is an open-ended question, so you can literally put anything you want. And we'll create a little bit of a word cloud with this one.
If you want to submit a multiple word response, if you put an underscore instead of a space, it'll enter it as a single word instead of multiple different words.
So Jess is my sister, if you don't know, and Jess and I were testing out the polls last night. And the first time she put it in, she put like lots of spaces in between words, and then it came up on my screen that it was, you know, a couple of words strung together, and she was like, yeah, this is coding. And I was like, what? Lots of community, positive impact. Love it. Yeah, cool. So social media doesn't necessarily always seem synonymous with doing good. You know, social media sometimes gets a bad rep. There's sometimes being a bit shallow or superficial. But I think we can link it to doing good. Cool, couple more seconds. All right. Well, thank you for participating in the polls. I'll leave that open. You can keep adding to that. But I just thought I'd sort of start talking a little bit about some of the overall themes that I want to think about today. So are we back on the presentation? Yeah, cool. So we've done the polls. We can move on. So these are sort of the overall themes that I hope that you can keep in the back of your mind while we sort of talk about social media in the next few minutes. And you'll hopefully have recognized some of this from the session description, but thinking about how social media can be open, it can be community, it can bring change, but also how it has inherent bias and it can create echo chambers and it can have certain power dynamics in it. These are sort of the overarching things I want to think about today. But I thought we'd start off with a little bit of information about how COVID-19 and coronavirus is sort of changing how we use social media. You know, phone use is increasing. We're spending a lot more time on our phones and our laptops. And it's not just for work. We're looking to connect, to entertain ourselves. So people are spending 20% more time in apps during the lockdowns. Our priorities are changing. You know, social media, as we've seen before, is a lot about connections and about community, but it's also about getting news and getting information updates. So that puts a lot of pressure on social media platforms to make sure that they're doing the right things to combat misinformation, but to also provide up-to-date news. And we're seeing in real time, really, how social media platforms can and can't respond to misinformation. So 48% of US and UK consumers use social media to read more news. I think most millennials and most people, I would say probably under the age of 40, get their news not necessarily directly from a news website, but from somewhere on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, following news organizations there. And of course, messaging and video chat apps are becoming increasingly important because, you know, it's difficult to replicate a face-to-face interaction, but at least there's something there. You know, views of Facebook and Instagram live video views doubled in a week. I remember at the beginning of the first lockdown that, you know, everyone was like, oh, there's so many live videos, there's just so much content, and like it can get a lot. It can get a bit much. But, you know, it's also about news and how, I guess, social media is sort of changing how we, you know, see advertising and how we consume news. So in 2019, $17 billion was spent on TV ads in Australia. 9.4 billion was spent on digital ads in 2019, which is up 7.1% on the previous year. So obviously social media has changed traditional media, you know, newspapers, radio. Of the 3 positive news stories of the day, they usually feature celebrities, animals or babies, and the royals. You know, the bottom line is that negative news gains more interest, and it's really difficult to get, you know, doing good and charities and causes and stuff to get the same kind of news traction in traditional media spaces. And, you know, just general signs, and these are statistics from last year, so I imagine that, again, COVID-19 has changed a lot of this. But 8 out of 10 Australians use social media, 59% of us use it every day, a third of us look at it 5 times a day, definitely me. We spend an hour and a half per day on social media. You add that up over 7 days a week, that's a lot of time. And and the average number of accounts per user is 6.1. So as you would have seen from, you know, the first question we did, lots of people would have been ticking lots of boxes. So I'm curious to know, what do we think about, sorry, let me just change the slide. There we go. Building a successful movement. So you can put up your hand or you can just unmute yourself, that's fine. What do we think is key to advocating for change? What's the sort of number one key to building a successful movement? You know, a movement that goes beyond just the one person, that spreads beyond just the one person.
I think it's like all about your following. Like I remember seeing this really cool video where like one person's dancing and they're kind of like creating the change, and then the second person joins, and it's really trying to get that second person, because then when you get the second person, you get the third, and I guess that's kind of when you kind of get your following. Yeah,
I love it, Jade. That's exactly the video I was thinking about when I asked this question, so I love it. Yeah, it's basically about influence. It's about impact. That, you know, if I can change someone else's life, then they can go on and affect 2 other people, and those 2 other people will affect 8 other people, and so on and so forth. And you sort of build this kind of ripple effect. So I guess social media can sort of spark the same sort of thing, that social media is very much a new power sort of tool, that whereas old power is establishment and leadership driven, new power is much more open. It's really about participation, you know, and social media also brings in the idea of branding, that you can have a visual aesthetic, that you can also find a voice that's, you know, so-called authentic. One of the examples we use is Airbnb. You know, they've been around since like 2001 or something, but it was only in the past 5 or so years that they've really been able to make an impact, and that's because they rebranded and they found a different voice that, you know, attracted travelers of a different kind. And then participation, and social media is, you know, well known for so-called clicktivism or slacktivism. That is the idea that, you know, you click or you like or whatever on social media and then don't do a lot else. But it's about turning those clicks into actual actions, whether that's, you know, donating or whatever it is, actually voting. But at the end of the day, it's also still, it's largely about the power of word of mouth. So this is, I've sort of taken this from a book on participation. This is a participation scale. So it's really about how you can start off on social media and how you can bring it across into real, tangible change, structural change in the real world. I'll give you an example, and I actually hadn't heard about this one, but I thought it was a really interesting one, was that the Indian anti-corruption activist Kisan Anna Baburao Hazair had been campaigning for social justice through so-called fast unto death to protest corrupt officials and unjust laws. So hunger strikes have been used for years and years, but in 2011, his biggest campaign was to support a national bill that would strengthen the power of ombudsmen to hold public officials accountable. But the Prime Minister rejected his demands, and so he announced he was beginning a fast, but he used new tactics. He asked Indians to send him a text if they supported his campaign, and the emerging middle class there has a nearly universal mobile phone reach, so he generated 80,000 texts. But people also use missed calls to communicate, so you dial and quickly hang up, and that's free. So Hazair provided a local number to call and asked Indians to show their support. And his numbers went from 80,000 to 35 million. 35 million missed calls, like that's a lot of calls. And the best part is Hazair had these phone numbers. So 2 weeks after he put out this call to action, his campaign had the world's largest spreadsheet of phone numbers of supporters. People on the list were contacted to help turn out people for protests, and eventually the government accepted some demands. So I just really wanted to show and highlight, you know, the real tangible difference that social media can make if it's used successfully. It takes a bit of planning, of course, and a bit of luck, I think, but it can be done. So I've just got some sort of common terms that you might have come across. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's a lot there. But I just wanted to highlight a few that you might have heard of in the past couple of months or so that I think, yeah, sort of important to think about, to talk about. So the first one is doom scrolling. Basically, when it's late at night and you're in bed, you probably go to sleep with your phone next to you, charging on your bedside table, and you're sort of scrolling at night trying to fall asleep. It's becoming increasingly common with the COVID-19, I think. And I just wanted to point out right from the very start that, you know, looking after your mental health is really important. Social media is seriously an addiction. There is science behind the chemicals that come from, you know, likes and follows and what we call vanity metrics. It's a real thing. So you've really got to create some barriers or some expectations for yourself so that you look after yourself. So that's doom scrolling, just the endless, mindless scroll through Instagram or YouTube. We'll come back to some of these others, but the influencer one is interesting. For those of you who don't know, you can basically become, you can basically have a full-time job as an influencer, and an influencer is basically just someone who's marketing, advertising for other companies, other brands, based on their own personal brand. So, and this isn't just on Instagram, this is on YouTube, this is everywhere. You can be a TikTok influencer too. So that's a really interesting industry to be taking note of right now. I've seen a lot of, you can see, because it's very fashion industry adjacent, you can see some of the same elitism and power structures sort of replicating itself in that industry too. So it's very unregulated at the moment. So we'll see where that leads us. Cancel culture is an interesting one. It links with the doxing over here. Doxing being the release of personal, private information. Very, like, please do not ever do that. But it's essentially a form of cyberbullying, and it kind of goes into it's bullying, really. But it relates to cancel culture in a sense, because cancel culture has sort of been this phenomenon over the past few years where something that a public figure says that or has said in the past sort of catches up to them, and they sort of become so-called cancelled, and the online community decides that that person or what that person has said is not okay. And it's sort of a freedom of expression issue, but I think it also links to the point that social media is not exactly the best space to talk about issues with nuance. Sorry, if you've got your mic on, can you please put yourself on mute? Thank you. And then algorithms and data, I'll just quickly talk about this one. Social media is based on algorithms, so there's the possibility, in fact, it's not just a possibility, it is definitely there, that there's bias in it. You know, for police, facial recognition is, quite simply put, more accurate for white people. Amazon tried to use AI to build a resume screening tool and fed it the resumes it already had, and the resumes it already had were largely male, and so the system picked up on that and kept going with that to lead on from last mentoring. In fact, just yesterday or whenever it was, the A-level results in the UK came out, and they used an algorithm to try and sort out the marking schemes, and guess what? It sorted all the students out according to their demographics in terms of their ethnic background and their gender and their parents', you know, situation in terms of work. Something is wrong there if your exam system is like, you can't do your exams, but then your grades are set according to your background, your demographics. Anyway, we'll leave that aside. But honestly, you can literally just open up your Instagram feed, your explore feed, and look at how same it looks. You know, this is why we talk about the echo chamber, but because what the algorithms pick up is, it's artificial intelligence, right? It's all computer-based stuff. And so it picks up what you've already liked, who you've followed, and it just feeds that back to you. And it's made worse if you don't follow, you know, official news sites or official government news, government accounts. So I really, one of the things that I like to stress is that you sort of make sure that you're following a variety of people, you know, not just the same white people. I went there. All right. Live streaming, just because this has become a really big thing in the past few months, is on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, is you can go live and you can, share video in real time. That's been a really interesting thing to take note of. Lots of donations have come in that way, and I think that that's been a really impressive way that Facebook and YouTube and Instagram have really tried to help non-for-profits and individuals start to create fundraisers. It's slowly trickling into Australia. Australia seems to get everything last, but you know, we get there. And then the last one down the bottom is ephemeral, and that's, so hopefully you know, but on Instagram and on Facebook you have stories up the top of your feed, and that is content that lasts for usually 24 hours. It happens on Snapchat as well. So ephemeral being the idea that you see the content and then it goes, that's it, versus evergreen content, which is content that sort of, you know, lasts forever. Cool. So these are just some examples. Question: who knows who started the Me Too movement? Anyone? Jess knows. She's smiling away in my screen. No one knows. This is interesting. All right, Jess, tell us.
The person who started it, or the person who like made it popular?
Who started it?
Don't remember the name.
Oh, Jess. Okay, so Tarana Burke is this woman up in the top right corner. She actually coined the term #MeToo a few years before what Jess is referring to is Alyssa Milano, the actress, sort of took it after that and sort of made it this really big popular thing. So it's really interesting to think about the starts of movements, the narratives that get told about the start of a movement. We've seen that in the past few months as well. It's really interesting to see how movements start, but also how over time, sometimes leadership can sort of fracture in a sense. So this is the Me Too movement, which is a really interesting example to use, obviously. That's why I like it. But there's other examples of movements too. There's the Time's Up movement, there's the March for Our Lives, there's the women's, the Arab Spring, there's the Occupy Wall Street. There's like plenty of examples out there. But so I'm curious whether we think that social media can really make a difference, a structural difference. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Because I realize I've been talking for a little while. Do we think social media can change? What does that change have to look like?
I think with the Me Too movement, like definitely, like I think that was like a very kind of taboo topic that a lot of people didn't feel like, they felt like they didn't have a platform to talk about it with friends and things like that. And then suddenly when people started sharing their top like stories, they realized like patterns and how common it was, and how it was kind of an issue that was people from all across the world could kind of relate to in different ways, of course. I think that was quite quite impactful to kind of get that out in the open.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jake. Do we think social movements, once they're started, do they have, or hashtag movements, do they have staying power? Is consciousness raising enough?
I don't know, I kind of feel like they get warped over time. And so sometimes the meaning gets lost. I think they can stay for a while. It depends what they evolve into, but it moves quite a bit.
Yeah, I think our attention spans, and I don't necessarily buy into the fact that, you know, our attention spans are worsening. I mean, there are studies, but I don't know. But definitely the pace, the fast pace of the news cycle makes a huge difference. And you can see that even in the Black Lives Matter. It's not trending anymore. It's not trending. So what does that mean for how long a social movement can last online? Is there like a limit to that time? Really interesting research, Zeynep Tufekci draws a comparison between social media and Sherpas. Bear with me. So previously, climbing Mount Everest was a challenging task, but with Sherpas, more people were capable of doing so. And this led to a spike in mountaineering tourism, but also a spike in the number of deaths. So these individuals remain unprepared for the reality of scaling the mountain, resulting in those deaths. So in the same way, social media has sort of enabled more social movements to spread and enter the public sphere, but there hasn't really been the long-term training or the building of network support to sustain these movements in a way. I just thought that was a really interesting piece of, well, it's really a metaphor or analogy. Some more examples. Has anyone noticed their Instagram feed looks a little different of late? The hint is on the screen, but has someone noticed a difference to their Instagram feeds of late? Rachel is nodding. Yeah. So you can see on the left-hand corner here, these are what we call slides. So on Instagram, you can post a carousel of posts of photos. So you can put 10 photos together, which was a new invention by a new feature of Instagram a couple of years ago or so. And you know, in the very beginning, photographers would use it, and we'd put like, you know, the best photo on the first post, and then the ugly photos or the not so good photos in the rest of the post. But it's really turned into a PowerPoint presentation, really. Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, young people, millennials, whoever's on Instagram really, have been sharing these slides of information, and, you know, you get a sense that they're playing to the aesthetics of Instagram. Like if you have a look at the slides on the screen there, they all look very similar. They all sort of buy into the algorithm and what works on Instagram. So I'm curious to know, like, what are our thoughts about this? You know, these are supposed to help to inform, to educate, but there's the issue of, like, you know, who's making these slides? Like literally this presentation is made on Canva, so are all of these slides on Instagram. You know, it's very, very easy to create these kinds of graphics. So is it reductive? Is education enough in the first place? There's also the idea that, you know, your online actions don't necessarily translate into offline actions. But at the same time, the line is probably not as clear cut as that, I don't think. I'm curious if other people have thoughts about these sort of slide decks.
Natanya, would we see
Yep.
that it's a little bit like Spotify, isn't it, in music? You know, once you've chosen one song or one artist or one album, then it tends to replicate it itself. But the key is to get outside. I mean, you know, going back to previous forms of social media like newspapers, often people just read the one newspaper. They didn't get a variety of views. Whereas now, if you curate your Twitter feed, for example, or whatever, you can get a much greater diversity of information and a much greater diversity of opinion. I guess the difficulty or the challenge is being able to sort the wheat from the chaff and being able to know, well, can I verify that or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. That's really good. I really appreciate what you're saying there. I definitely think we have to think about our sources critically. We have to think about what we do with that information critically, and we have to, yeah, absolutely think about the diversity of those sources.
Tony, I was thinking about different ways to convey the same message, in that some people will be people who just read words, other people need some graphics or images. There are people who might have learning difficulties who need to have a yellow or green background to see things more clearly. So it gives an opportunity to convey the same message in several different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things is, this text on clear backgrounds issue it's very difficult for people with some kind of visual impairment to do this. So what people have done is you can actually add alternative text into Instagram or Twitter or Facebook for that matter. And we'll come to this later, actually. I was going to address this later. But thanks for bringing up the accessibility issues. It does matter. And if you're creating a movement where there are diverse interests and diverse backgrounds and diverse needs, then you have to address those. On the right-hand side, you can see there's some Instagram black squares, and basically that was hashtag Blackout Tuesday, which started off as a music industry day to sort of bring attention to the Black Lives Matter movement. It's really interesting because people were tagging the Black Lives Matter hashtag, which was blocking a lot of information, crucial protest or bail or whatever information about the protests from that hashtag, from the Black Lives Matter hashtag. So it's interesting also to see, especially where a movement is happening in real time, that sometimes, the reason for using a hashtag can differ. And if you're not party to that information, it becomes this sort of, oh, I'm going to step out and do this, and then have to rethink what you're doing later on. So it's difficult. I acknowledge that, but it's really difficult to not be reactive in the social media space. The same thing is with the hashtag Women Supporting Women, which was a few weeks ago now. I had a look. There's 8.7 million posts on there right now. The top 9 in my feed yesterday were not black and white selfies. So the idea was to take a black and white selfie, or post a black and white selfie of yourself as a woman, and then send it off as a challenge to tell 50 or 20, the number varied invariably, to message 50 or whatever it was other women and tell them that they're beautiful, or so the story goes. I mean, this is a tag that's been used for years and years, but recently we found out that there seems to have been some use of the tag in Turkey to bring attention to femicide. So again, hashtags can be used for different reasons. The problem with a movement, as Bianca was saying earlier, is that sometimes a movement can be warped. And I think hashtags are especially susceptible to this. I'm not sure that all social media is like this, but it's really interesting to think about how, I guess coming back to that diverse interest and what happens when a social movement becomes so big that your voice kind of gets drowned out. Moving on, because time is also running away. We've seen a bit of censorship, we've seen a bit of misinformation, in fact, quite a lot of misinformation, and some bots too. So has anyone ever replied to a bot? Show of hands. I definitely have. I did it just this week. Yeah, it's funny. You can see in the bottom left. This is from the Instagram story sticker, which allows you to ask a question and then you can just get responses from literally whoever. And yeah, it's literally whoever, because these are all definitely bots. It's a very interesting thing that, you know, lots of brands and influencers and wannabe influencers maybe use bots to sort of, you know, try and get more attention or follows or likes. I'm not really quite sure what they're aiming for, to be honest, but, you know, I think I have noticed when I ask questions on Instagram in the past couple of months, it has improved, that there's not so many bots, but there's a potential for misinformation.
Natanya, can you really quickly explain what a bot is?
Yeah, sure. So a bot is like an automated sort of messaging tool. Usually it's a messaging tool, and it's automated, so it's all run by computers, machines, that kind of thing, and they just send automatic responses, or in this case sort of very weird messages, to be honest. There are some seriously, like, these are all brands mostly, or from memory, like, I mean, I screenshotted this from a while ago, but there can be very unsavory messages too. I have public accounts, so I get DMs from people, really unsavory things, really. Yeah, so bots have the potential to really bring down the power of social media, I think, because, you know, something like 3% of all Facebook accounts are supposed to be fake accounts. Will I talk about hacking? Probably not today. Hacking generally tends to happen when you click on a bot. Sometimes it can cause your account to be hacked, but there are privacy controls that you can put into place to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the first thing I would say is to try and put a double password. It's two-step factor authentication. I always highly suggest that you do that. And don't worry about not keeping up with the terminology. It's always changing. We all struggle with it. As you can see here, like, I was going to ask you, what role do you think that social media platforms should play in curbing misinformation? You know, we're seeing it right now with masks, with so this Trump post on the right-hand side was taken down because this symbol has negative connotations. But even just like a couple of weeks ago, a Trump video was taken down because he claimed that that children were immune from COVID-19, and Facebook took that down, which it hasn't necessarily always done in the past. Twitter has been a bit more active. This middle one is the Facebook Coronavirus Information Center. So I think that Facebook has been very involved in the public health space, but perhaps not so much in the, I don't know, political sphere, I guess you could call it, whereas Twitter has labelled the accounts of US senators, for instance, and has said that they'll start labelling government accounts of, curiously enough, like, I laughed aloud when I read the press release, but they're going to be labelling the accounts of the UN Security Council's Permanent Five, which, you know, that's China, America, Russia, whatever. Is really interesting because a lot of these companies are, you know, American companies, apart from TikTok, as we've seen. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see how social media platforms are trying to navigate that balance between platform and publisher. I'm curious, does anyone have any thoughts on that? So should social media be censoring?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there needs to be accountability, but I don't know who has the responsibility to. I think individuals do, but you don't see individuals taking that accountability. So I think probably social media companies should try to do something. I don't know what the extent of that is, though.
But I think we see examples around the world, don't we, of various governments, particularly totalitarian regimes, censoring social media, whether you like it or not. You know, there are 1 or 2 countries where you can't even access the key social media platforms that you can. So that's really nothing to do with the platform self-censoring at all. And the difficulty is that because these companies are transnational, it's difficult to know who holds legal jurisdiction over them and who can curate them in a certain way. You know, you're relying on the multi-billion-dollar owner to actually exercise some discretion when that might mean cutting back their profits. So it's a vexing question. But you know, whoever holds the power of the message controls the media in many ways. And even if, as I said, if I go back to last century, again, in the middle of last century, we saw totalitarian regimes who controlled the media through their propaganda out their populations extremely well. So in some ways, we see no difference between what we've got with social media now, except it's a lot flashier to use the iPhone or whatever, rather than, you know, a newspaper or the newsreel in a movie theatre, as they did. We've still got that issue. I still think it comes back to the individual being discriminating enough to choose widely their source and have the ability to be able to say yes to that or no to that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, it's really interesting. So I study law at university right now. So I'm very interested in international law, and that's one of the things that I've been thinking about of late is there a way that we can come up with some kind of international sort of jurisdiction to sort of cover these sorts of issues? It's really interesting because international law doesn't tend to be very effective. You know, it's based on a system of states consenting to give up their power, essentially. So I don't know if we'll actually see this, but maybe something like this pandemic has shown us that we have to be more vigilant about how social media is used. Cool, lovely. Keep moving on. Why won't it change slides? There we go. So this is just a little bit about accessibility, just so that you know that it's there and that people, I think, you know, people don't necessarily know about this, especially, I think most social media marketers probably know about this, but you can write alternative text. So that's text that is read out aloud for people with visual impairments. You can do this on Facebook and Twitter. This is from Instagram. It's in your advanced settings when you post anything. So that harks back to what Jeff brought up earlier on. And you can, of course, put in your closed captions on your videos for YouTube, but we've seen it on Instagram stories as well. So just wanted to flag that as well. So that brings me to this idea of what we call ethical social media, and whether this is even really a possible thing at all. You know, the idea that we can introduce ethical principles into social media design. I think, as Daryl pointed out before, is that social media organizations, they're companies, they are for profit. And that's not necessarily a good thing. So a lot of the problems that we see in social media, in some ways, are just further evidence of the systems that make up our world. So how much can we really change? Possibly I'm a little bit pessimistic about that, but you know, it's for profit, these social media platforms. So they're buying into capitalism. They have a bit of an American bias. You know, Trump signing an executive order to ban TikTok in America, and then Instagram, which, by the way, like, I don't think will really make a difference. Just putting it out there, but we'll see what happens. And then last week or the week before, Instagram released basically a TikTok clone on their own app called Reels. So, you know, companies are always susceptible to political interference and overall distrust in government. And it's funny because normally we think of government as always playing catch up to the big tech companies more generally. Do we have any thoughts on this? Thought I saw some things in chat, but what do we think about the possibility that users can sort of define their relationship with a platform a bit more? I think it's an interesting idea. I think that, you know, in some ways, especially because of the algorithms, that the way that we use social media is almost in a way dictated to us. And also the idea that I would like to push back on, I think, is, especially for young people, I think for millennials and for anyone younger than that, social media is almost, I heard this phrase the other day and it really resonated with me, that social media is almost mandatory for us. That, like, there's no way to opt out, but you have to be on, you know, at least one platform because it's the way that we connect. We don't exchange phone numbers or emails anymore. We exchange Facebook or Instagram profiles. And in some ways, I'm not so sure that that's really the case, but I think that young people feel the pressure and we don't necessarily know how to navigate public spaces. We don't necessarily have the education to know, oh, I should be following a diverse group of people. You know, as Dale pointed out, I think quite rightfully so, that we don't have this, we have to take responsibility as individuals, but I don't think we're taught to do that. We're just sort of given a phone and then given free rein to join a social media platform. So I think education is certainly a start. Any thoughts?
I think all the points about education are really interesting and useful, especially as I'm going to be a future teacher. But talking about education around social media, etc., I was just thinking back to high school. I might have been in about year 9 or 10, and we had a whole school assembly, I think, that was all about, like, it was meant to be about safety online and like sexting and all those sorts of kind of risque, non-talked about things with adults and teenagers as such. And I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, I never want to use these things ever again. And of course I did, but it just really scared me. And it makes me think as well, a unit that I'm taking at the moment at uni is really focused on strength-based approaches. I think your webinar is fantastic because you're obviously trying to say, these are all the ways that we can use this positively. So I think if you try and teach people the good ways that it can be used and the ways that social media can inform them in a positive way, like by looking at different sources and all that sort of thing, that would definitely be, well, I hope it would have a better impact than just telling them, don't do this, because it's going to just scare people and then they won't learn anything at all, I think.
So like focusing on encouraging the good behaviors and like what to do on Instagram or on any social media platform rather than saying, don't do this, don't do that. That's,
Rachel, I'm someone at the other end of the teaching spectrum, having begun my career last century before they'd invented motor cars. And I have to say that the advent of social media into young families and classrooms in some cases has been devastating. We know, for example, research tells us that children as young as grade 3 are now watching porn on a regular basis because they can access it through social media in a way that they weren't able to before. So, you know, as a grandparent of teenage children at the moment, it takes strong, consistent guidelines with parents and the home situation and school itself to battle, if you like, against the pervasive influence of social media. You know, part of that issue is that that FOMO, you know, all my friends are online, all my friends are talking, all my friends are there, and you know, what can I do? And the issue of bullying, you know, it used to be that someone would be taken down round behind the shelter shed and, you know, have their hair cut off, and that'd be the bullying. But now with social media, you know, it goes right into a child's bedroom at home, because they can still be continuing. You know, I think for young teachers such as you, it's incredibly important to bring home to children and the young ones you're going to be working with that social media is a phenomenal aspect of modern life, but it needs to be treated with that self-discipline and that awareness that it can be incredibly dangerous. My son is a lawyer, and he talks about the aspects of a job, you know, interviews where, you know, you apply for a job and someone's already been through your Facebook page to see whether you like it or not, because it's on the public platform. You know, what's there is there forever. So I wish you all the success that you can, Rachel. It's a difficult path. It's changed teaching directly. You know, it used to be you could sit kids down and you could show them a movie film on an old projector that would go for 45 minutes and they'd sit and watch it. Now you try and do a YouTube clip that goes for longer than 2 minutes and they've lost their attention. They can't last that long. Good luck, Rachel.
Well, Daryl, and thank you, Daryl and Rachel, for sharing that. That was really good.
Can I just add to that? I think governments have a huge responsibility to play, and they spend a lot of time trying to, you know, counter social media, you know, through legal systems, whatever. But, you know, I believe the money should be spent on public advertising. You know, there ought to be programs like, you know, Slip, Slop, Slap and, you know, Drink Wisely and all of those things that really target young people, because, you know, we need to make sure that people are aware of the dangers before they get involved. They need to learn it from outside, not from practical experience.
Yeah, you do not want to be on the receiving end, that's for sure. Well, Daryl interestingly brought up the the point about the personal and professional lives. So this brings me to the next point, and this is really just to wrap up. I'm totally aware it's 11:08. So social media is really just breaking down the barriers between our personal and professional lives. I mean, we've seen that with working from home in that situation. And, you know, you can rock up to a lecture in your bed, and you can go on a Zoom call and a Zoom meeting and be in your pajamas, or at least from the bottom down. So, you know, it's navigating this space is difficult. It can be difficult as well, but I strongly believe, again, in setting boundaries for yourself. So I talk about the personal, professional, and business sort of side of things. I'm just curious, does anyone have more than one Instagram account? Do they own more than one Instagram account? I definitely do. Okay, interesting. No one does. I do, because I have a photography page. I have that, actually that's quite a few pages, but we won't go into that. But people own more than one Instagram account, and it's really interesting to think about what you share on each of those accounts. So normally one is a bit more personal and one's a bit more professional or business. So personal stuff is obviously, you know, personal. It can be private or public, depending on your choice. But I guess for most of us have personal accounts. And so what Daryl was talking about earlier about, you know, employers going into your social media and checking out what you've posted there so far means that you have to be really careful about what you share. You know, everything, private or not, deleted or not, whatever, it can all be tracked. It can all be tracked. So being aware of that should hopefully guide how you share yourself online, and making sure that you do so professionally, especially on LinkedIn and those sorts of platforms. But also in a sort of personal sense, I guess, also being an advocate for your organization, for any organizations that you are part of, for who you represent. So for instance, I'll share plenty of Rotary and Rotaract related stuff on my personal account. And that's what we call employee advocacy, although Rotary or Rotaract does not employ me, unfortunately. But I guess on the other hand, if you own a business, making sure that you get basic training in social media marketing, come and chat to me. And if it's a business based on your personal brand, I always suggest a separate account. But that also depends on your needs. In any case, it's about, you know, creating a strategy that allows you to show who you are while also looking after yourself. So although we call it social media consumption, social media is a lot less filling up your glass than it is drinking from it in some ways. You know, that social media can be very draining. So I just want to say, and especially right now, because the pandemic is bringing up all kinds of weird mental health, and it's just a weird situation. So make sure that you're looking out for yourself. Taking social media breaks or logging out for a bit of time is really, really helpful. But it's helpful overall, and to openly discuss social media, the positive aspects, the negative aspects, and to think about how we can use it for good. So I hope that sort of helps. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself right now. But thank you again. It's been a really insightful session, I think. Hopefully it has been for you.